So what we want to do next is we want to take some of the different concepts that we discussed with amplitude and displacement and what their effect is on the y values, and period and phase shift and what their effect is on the x values. And we kind of looked at those two concepts sort of separately. What we want to kind of do next is we want to kind of take all of those different things and kind of blend it together into one equation. So just some steps for sketching some of these graphs by hand, and we've already kind of gone over some of these things, but haven't really spelled them out as far as steps go. So it's kind of what I'm looking to do with you here. So first thing is this: you have to know your critical values. You got to memorize them. Okay, so for each of the sine and cosine graphs, you have to know what your critical values are. Then you should know what the period for each of the functions are. So remember, the period for the sine and cosine graph is 2 pi unless there's some sort of horizontal stretching or shrinking involved. So make sure you know what the period of the graph is. Then you want to establish what your points are along the x and y axis. And that's some of the different things that we've done mathematically with the table of values. Then make sure you know what the value of the amplitude is, what the phase shift is, what the displacement is. And then if you have to do some different shifting that differs from your denominator along your x-axis, make sure you get your common denominators in there, and that's something you can do in your calculator in a real quick and easy way to reestablish what your points are. Then you plot the points, connect them with a smooth curve. So as we kind of move into some of the more challenging types of equations to graph in regards to sine and cosine. So here you have y equals 3 times the cosine of 2 times x plus pi minus 1. So if you notice, I have these values here, which are going to have a direct impact on my y coordinates, and then I have these values here, which are going to have a direct impact on my x coordinates. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of room on both sides of the table here. So first thing I'm going to start with for cosine is my critical values. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. For my y coordinates, I have for cosine 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1. So I'm going to take my x coordinates first. So remember, this 2 that's in front of the parentheses tells me that the graph is going to have a horizontal shrink to it. So I want to take each of my x values, I want to divide it by 2. The other part of this equation that's going to have an effect on my x values is this right here. So remember, adding pi inside the parentheses is going to shift the graph to the left pi units. So mathematically speaking, to shift to the left, I want to subtract. So everything here is going to get subtracted by pi. So when I work these out, first I have 0 divided by 2 is 0, minus pi is negative pi. Then I have pi over 2 divided by 2 is pi over 4, minus pi would be negative 3 pi over 4. Pi divided by 2 is pi over 2, minus pi would be negative pi over 2. 3 pi over 2 divided by 2 is 3 pi over 4, minus pi would be negative pi over 4. And then finally, 2 pi divided by 2 is pi, minus pi would be 0. So that reestablishes what my new x values are going to be. Now for my y values, notice I have this 3 that's being multiplied in front of the function, and then I have this minus 1 at the end that's going to shift the graph down. So this 3 is going to vertically stretch the graph. So I'm going to take each of my y values, I'm going to times them by 3. Then this displacement at the end is going to shift all the points down 1. So I'm going to minus 1 at the end of each one of these. So when I work this out, 1 times 3 is 3, minus 1 is 2. 0 times 3 is 3, minus 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, minus 1 is negative 4. 0 times 3 is 0, minus 1 would be negative 1. And then finally, 1 times 3 is 3, minus 1 would be 2. So those are my new y values. Now, I can make my graph. So notice with this, I'm going to give myself a lot of room on this negative side because most of my x values, 4 of the 5, are on the negative side of the x-axis. So I have here negative pi, negative 3 pi over 4, negative pi over 2, negative pi over 4, and then I have 0 right here. And then my y values, this goes up to positive 2, and then down to negative 4. So now I can start to plot my points. So first I have negative pi, positive 2, that's going to be up here. And then I have negative 3 pi over 4, negative 1, that's going to be down here. Then I have negative pi over 2, negative 4, that's going to be down here. Negative pi over 4, negative 1, that's going to go here. And then finally 0, 2, that's going to go here. So here's my graph that connects those points. So once again, my arrows on the end for cosine, I'm going to have this arrow going this way, I'm going to have this arrow going that way there. So that's what my graph for part A is going to look like. For part B, I have y equals 2 times the sine of, in parentheses, 3x plus 2 pi plus 1. So notice once again, you have the b value inside the parentheses. So remember, you want to factor that out first before you do anything with your x values. So if I factor a 3 out of the parentheses here, that's going to make this x plus 2 pi over 3, and then plus 1 at the end. So remember, this ends up being 2 pi over 3 because I'm basically just taking what's in the parentheses here and dividing it by what I'm factoring out. So now when I go to do my x and y values, I'm going to start with my critical values. So I have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. My y values I have for sine 0, 1, 0, negative 1, and 0. So mathematically speaking, if I take my x values first, so here this 3 lets me know that the graph is going to have a horizontal shrink. So I'm going to divide each of my x values by 3. And then as far as the x coordinates, also, because I have plus 2 pi over 3 in the parentheses, that tells me that the graph is going to shift to the left 2 pi over 3, and if I shift to the left, I want to subtract. So each one of these are also going to get subtracted by 2 pi over 3. So when I work these out, I have 0 divided by 3 is 0, minus 2 pi over 3 is negative 2 pi over 3. Here I have pi over 2 divided by 3 is pi over 6, minus 2 pi over 3 is negative pi over 2. Then I have pi divided by 3 is pi over 3, minus 2 pi over 3 is negative pi over 3. Then I have 3 pi over 2 divided by 3, that's pi over 2, minus 2 pi over 3 would be negative pi over 6. And then finally, 2 pi divided by 3 is 2 pi over 3, minus 2 pi over 3 would be 0. So that's the x values. Now the y values, notice I have here a vertical stretch, and then I also have here the graph shifting up 1. So remember, always deal with your stretching and shrinking first. So each one of these y values are going to get multiplied by 2. Then I'm going to add 1 at the end for the displacement. So when I work this out, 0 times 2 is 0, plus 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 is 3. 0 times 2 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, plus 1 would be negative 1. And then 0 times 2 is 0, plus 1 would be 1. So I have that there. So now I can make my graph. So once again, if you notice with your x values, I have 4 of the 5 critical values on the negative side of the x-axis. So I'm going to just leave myself some room over here so I can fit all those on there. So I have negative 2 pi over 3, negative pi over 2, negative pi over 3, negative pi over 6, and 0. And then I have for my y's, this goes up to positive 3, this goes down to negative 1. Fill these in here. Now I can start plotting some points. So the first point is negative 2 pi over 3, positive 1. That's going to be here. And then I have negative pi over 2, positive 3. That's going to be up here. Then I have negative pi over 3, positive 1. That's going to go here. Then I have negative pi over 6, negative 1. That's going to go there. And then finally 0, 1 is going to go here. So now when I connect the points, I have something that looks like this. So for the sine graph, this left side arrow is going to point down, this right side the arrow is going to point up. So that's what my graph for part B looks like. And then for part C, I have y equals negative 3 cosine of 2 pi x plus 4 pi. So notice with this, once again, the value of b is in the parentheses. And also notice for the first time you're seeing a value of b that's written in terms of pi. So that's going to make your graph look a little bit different, particularly your x values are going to look a little bit different than some of the examples that we've done already. So first let me deal with factoring out that 2 pi out of the parentheses. So this is going to be y equals negative 3 cosine 2 pi, and this is going to be x plus, and when I do 4 pi divided by 2 pi, that's just going to be a 2 there. So that's what the equation looks like when I factor the b out of the parentheses. Now I can do my tables. So notice with this, I'm going to get my critical values in for cosine. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And for the y's, this is going to be for cosine 1, 0, negative 1, 0, and 1. So notice once again I have two different things here that are affecting the x values. I have this 2 pi value for b, which is going to horizontally shrink the graph. So I'm going to divide each of these by 2 pi. Then I have this in the parentheses, this plus 2. So that's taking the graph and it's shifting it to the left 2 units. So mathematically speaking, I want a minus 2 at the end for each one of these. So here when I do 0 divided by 2 pi, that's 0, minus 2 is negative 2. Pi over 2 divided by 2 pi is 1/4, and 1/4 minus 2 is negative 7/4. Then here I have pi divided by 2 pi is 1/2. 1/2 minus 2 is negative 3/2. Here I have 3 pi over 2 divided by 2 pi is 3/4. Minus 2 would be negative 5/4. And then finally here, 2 pi divided by 2 pi is 1, minus 2 would be negative 1. So notice with this that you have, for the first time, you're seeing x values that are not written in terms of pi. And the reason for that is because the b value in this equation had a pi in it. So whenever you have a b value that has the value of pi in it, you're going to end up with x values that do not have a value of pi in them. It doesn't happen often, but it can occur sometimes. So then I have my y values. Well, if you notice in this equation, the only thing that's going to impact my y values is this negative 3 right here. So all of my y values are going to get multiplied by negative 3. So when I multiply this out, 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. 0 times negative 3 is 0. Negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3. 0 times negative 3 is 0. And finally, 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. So now I can start to plot some points. So notice with this that all 5 of my x values are on the negative side of the x-axis. So when I go to do this here, I have negative 2, negative 7/4, so leaving myself a lot of room on this side here, negative 3/2, negative 5/4, and finally negative 1. And then my y values are going from positive 3 down to negative 3. So my first point here is negative 2, negative 3. That's going to be down here. Then my next point is negative 7/4, 0. That's going to go here. Then I have negative 3/2, positive 3. That's going to be up here. Then I have negative 5/4, 0. That's going to go there. And then finally negative 1, negative 3 is going to be down here. So here's the graph that I have that connects those points, and then remember my arrows on the ends of the graph. Each of these are going to both point in an upwards direction. So that's some different things from an equation standpoint that involves taking both values that have an impact on the x-coordinates as well as values that have an impact on the y-coordinates and rolling all of those things together into one equation. One of the things that we will look at in the next lesson is basically what we've done in the previous 3 lessons here, but in reverse. So instead of having an equation and having to make a graph based on what the values in the equation are, what we're going to do next is we're going to take a graph and we're going to attempt to write the equation for it based on some of the different things that we've described with the sine and cosine functions.